Welcome. So we'll begin with yet another important topic, and that is production and cost, a very essential element of understanding the microeconomics and the nature of microeconomics. So let's begin with the topic first. In the last section, we talked about the behavior of a consumer. It is the utility. So when I talk about utility, it is the satisfaction that is derived for something. Let's say a person starts to eat. Now, when he is initially hungry, what he thinks is, at least I'll have 2 slices of bread. Now, he consumes 1 slice of bread. What happens is, he still has a want for another slice, and that's a kind of very strong want. So his marginal utility would increase, but as soon as he consumes a slice of bread, his marginal utility would start to decrease, because whatever extra is going on, his speed to eat would decrease, and consequently his marginal utility would decrease, because the desire or the satisfaction obtained from an extra slice of bread would decline after he has reached its peak. That is, the person is now full, he does not want to consume more bread. Then his marginal utility starts to decline. Now, as we have talked about the consumer behavior, the marginal utility similarly is the marginal rate of technical substitution, which we will understand in this lecture, where we would be talking about production. Now, to begin with, be it anything around you, you are consuming some things or other on a day-to-day basis. It could start from your basic meal, it could start from your housing, it starts from your clothing, any of the basic amenities. Leave aside any other amenity, even the basic amenities, there is a kind of fulfillment that is required, and that could be only and only met if there is production. So what is production? Production, I can simply put, is a process where input is transformed into an output. So whatever is coming into the firm is transformed into an output. Let's say you want to have a slice of bread, or you want to consume chapatis. What would happen? You would have the raw wheat that would undergo processing, it would become a flour, and finally it would be ready for a slice of bread. So what would happen here is a production. From input to output, we say this is the chain of production. Now this production requires numerous things. First is, it definitely requires a capital. This capital could be in the form of land or machines, whatever is required. Okay, but there should be something where this production process takes place. The next is the labor, who would be working day in and day out to bring out the production. The third is the raw material. Definitely wheat is required in the case of processing to a bread. So all these things, when brought together, can help transform an input into a output, and with this output that's there, you have the process of production that can be explained. Now, simply put, let's take a 2-factor example. I have just 2 factors of production, and that is capital and labor. So let's say I have a factory, but on that factory there is no labor to work. Will there be any production? Obviously no. On the other hand, I do not have any capital with me. I just have a huge workforce that's there. But without any capital, will these labor be of any use? Will there be any production that would be coming out? Obviously no. So there has to be a balance between the capital and the labor. At no point of time I can say, if I don't have labor, only capital is fine, or if I don't have capital, only labor is fine. That cannot be the scenario. So production process is an instantaneous process. It's a creation of economic utility, from where producer gets involved with the consumer, and it's where you bring both the producer and the consumer together. You have the process of production and cost cycle that we understand in microeconomics. Now, what is the price of the input? The price of the input, I can say, is the cost of the production. So, cost of the production would be the price of the input that is going in. Then you have input of the firm, and that is your production factor. Then what is there is the output which is sold into the market. Now this output which is sold in the market comes as revenue. So what we actually understand is this revenue can be explained by the cost and the profit that a firm is acquiring. A simple way to put this up is, let's say I have something, let's say earphones that I produce for 80 bucks, and then I have a 20 of profit that I can have on it. What would be my revenue? My revenue would not only be just the profit, that's just the profit I have, but the revenue is the total cost along with the profit. So my net turnover here would be 100, and that is my cost plus the profit I have taken. So revenue, if positive, it's good, definitely denotes that you have profit making. But if the revenue is less than the cost, it denotes loss. Again, for anything to exist into the market, the aim is maximization of profit. So by sole mean, a producer is aiming to derive a maximum profit. So that is the very essential concept under the production, how the process of production goes, what is production. Along with that, you have one more important thing, the types of production. So the types of production can be explained as, first, the form production, where I am just using the raw material and bringing out the finished product. The next is place production. Place of production explains the transportation that is involved. The third is the time production. So time of production explains, let's say you have strawberries that are grown at place X and transported to place Y, but these are the fruits which are highly perishable. So what I need is a good cold storage that is there. So cold storage becomes essential. The third is the production, where we understand the services. So these could be the professional services, the professional skills involved. So teachers, lawyers, doctors, so all those come under the service sector. So that's the very essential of the production process. Coming on to production function and isoquants. Now as we know that for any production to take place, if I consider this as a two-factor model, I just have the capital and the labor with me. I need to have a minimum amount of capital so that labor can work, or a minimum amount of labor on certain capital so that there can be production. There can be no case where either of those two exist and there is production. So production function, simply put, I can say is a function of capital and labor involved, and both the inputs are necessary for any kind of production to take place. Now once you have the production, efficiency becomes another important criteria. So efficiency implies that it's not possible to get any more output than what is coming. So that's the maximum peak that you have now, and it's not possible to be much more efficient beyond it. So at certain point you have your peak levels of production that take place, and beyond that further things are not possible. So production function is defined for a given technology. Now what would happen if my technology betters or my technology improves? Let's say today I have a machine that requires 10 laborers to work. Okay, so that is with my existing technology, my production function is something. So this is my production function with the capital and labor involved. Okay, so if I have 5 units of capital, I would have 2 units of labor. Okay, if I have 1 unit of capital, I require 10 units of labor. So as I increase my machinery, I require lesser laborers to work on it. But that's with the existing technology. Now consider the fact that I enhance my technology, I improve my technology. So on a machine where 10 laborers were working, now I require only, let's say, 6 laborers to work. So what would happen? The whole of the production function would shift and I would have a new curve that would be drawn. And this is how we understand that production function is understood at a given technology. As soon as the technology improves, as the knowledge improves, you have a newer production curve on which you are shift to, and then the output, which is the combination of the two inputs, changes. So here, let's say isoquants can be rightly explained as a curve which is convex to the origin. So as you can see, it appears convex from here. So from the origin, this appears to be convex. Now how do you remember it? Concave is a cave. So if you understand this as a depression, that would be a concave. But in this case, it is convex to the origin. So isoquants are always convex to origin. That's the rule 1. They are always negatively sloped or decreasing in nature. And when I talk about isoquants, the most important thing is on one isoquant curve, I am trying to maintain the same output. Now how do I do it? Let's say in the first case, I have 1 capital and 10 labor. In the next case, I increase my capital to 2 and decrease my labor to 8. So on this case, both the points, this is point A and this is point B, on both the points my output remains same. I am not changing my output. Output, let's say, is 100 garments per day that is manufactured in the factory. So if I decrease my labor and I increase my capital, my output is ought to remain the same, and that's what is isoquant. So isoquant is a set of all possible combinations of the two inputs that yield the maximum level of output that can be seen. So the output in case of A, output in case of B, or any other point along the curve would remain the same. The variation would be a change in the unit of one production factor vis-a-vis the change in the unit of another production function, and this is what is known as MRTS, marginal rate of technical substitution. Now marginal rate of technical substitution, as we have understood in the previous lectures, we talked about marginal utility, the extra satisfaction which is derived from one change in the unit or a change in the unit that is added. Similarly, marginal rate of technical substitution talks about an increase or a decrease, we can say change in one factor of production vis-a-vis a increase or decrease in another factor of production, so that my output remains constant. So let's say if I am increasing the capital, I would decrease my labor. If I am decreasing my capital, I would increase my labor. Vis-a-vis, the whole idea is the change should be such that the output remains constant or the output remains same. And this is where we understand the marginal rate of technical substitution. Now this is very similar to an indifference curve. So indifference curve is a curve where you have two different combination of quantities that a consumer is willing to consume. But here we are talking about the production. So we have the two factors of production that we have taken into account. So here are two of these that we have taken into account. There could be other two that could be taken into account. Now if I want to plot the capital and labor, let's say, and I have the output. So in the case A, B, C, D, I have 5 points. I have my capital which is 15, 10, 2. I have my labor which is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. My output remains 100 for all of those. So what is the change here? This change is 5. This change is 1. In the second change, the change is 4 and 1. The change is 3 and 1. The change is, as let's say, 2 and 1. So what the idea here is, I am trying to have a ratio, and this ratio is 5:1, 4:1, 3:1 and 2:1. And that's the marginal rate of technical substitution that I have. The change in the proportion of capital is to the change in the proportion of labor, so that my output remains the output remains constant. Now, once I have one curve that is drawn, any other curve that I am trying to draw would have a different depiction, and that would be because there is a newer technology that is added, there is change in the factors of, there is increase in the technology that is there, change in the technology that has occurred, and because of that I totally shift to a new curve that is there. And this is how I explain isoquants. So very simple concept, very fundamental concept. A very important thing that you need to understand here is under production function, under isoquants, we focus on the basic idea which talks about the marginal rate of technical substitution. Considering the output remains constant, I have to do a change in the input, the two factors of production that are there. And with this, we have the very basics that could help us move towards the next concept, which is the long run and the short run production function, which is another very important. So we would begin with production function, short run, long run, the total product, average and marginal product, and the laws of diminishing marginal utility. Now, talking about the production function, as I said, once you have a production function which is a function of the labor as well as the capital, so it's a function of labor and capital. Now this production function could be explained under short run or long run. Long run is returns to scale and short run is returns to factor. Now either of those would involve the fixed variables, the fixed factors and the variable factors. So fixed factors and the variable factors. Now what is the difference? Labor is something that's required every day, day in and day out. So it is a variable cost or a variable factor of production, I would say. On the other hand, I have purchased one plot of land on which you have already put up the machines. So that piece of land is a fixed production, fixed cost, or the fixed fixed factor that is taken into account. Similarly, the machines that I have put up once, but the maintenance of the machine would be a variable cost. So there are some costs which are fixed cost and the other costs that varies are the variable factors. Now, in a short-term production function, what happens is you can vary at least one of the parameters, but both the parameters usually do not vary in short run. So let's say in short run I could get one more piece of land, but I won't immediately hire a lot of labor to work on it. Or I could increase my labor force to 1 or 2, but I won't add the unit of land at that point of time. But what happens under a long run is you are open to all the factors of production, be it the variable factor, be it the fixed factor, and you are allowing either an increase in the capital or increase in the labor, whatever it is. So both the factors of production are prone to change in a long run, which are not in a short run. Now what happens with every unit of labor that comes in? So let's say initially there was no labor, so no production. And therefore we say isoquants or the production curves do not touch the origin, because there could not be a scenario when the labor is 0 or the capital is 0. So they would be always away from the x-axis and the y-axis, the very first rule. Now, as soon as there is 1 unit of labor, there is some production that comes in. With 2 units, the production increases. With 3, the production increases further. But at a point, it would reach a saturation. After that, every new labor that is added would not add to the production, would not add at the same rate, I would say, to the production. Okay, so what happens is I have the labor that's there, the total production, the marginal production and the average production. Average product. So the total product is here, which you can see is given here. Marginal is the change. So 0 to 10, it's 10. 10 to 24, it's 14. 24 to 40, it's 16. 40 to 50, it's 10, and so on. So you can see the marginal product of an input is defined as the change in the output per unit change in the input. It increases for a while and then it starts to decline. Now, what is important to understand? Now this is where we bring in the same example of the marginal utility, the marginal satisfaction, which is derived from 2 slices of bread. As soon as the 2 is reached, at the third slice, my marginal utility would decline. Similarly here, with a new labor unit that is being added, the production would not increase at the same rate as it was increasing till a specific point. After that, it would start to decline. And what is average? Average is simply put the total production divided by the labor. So here it is 10 by 1, here it is 24 by 2, 40 by 3, 50 by 4, and so on. Okay, so that is what is the average product. So average product is the output per unit variable or the defined as the output per unit variable input that is given there. So that's what is the average cost. Total production is the total amount of production that is seen as per the set of resources that are available. Average product is the average of those, the mean of those we could say, and marginal is the cost for the very next unit to be produced in the as a resource. Now, what is marginal rate of the law of diminishing marginal utility or the law of variable proportion. Whatever values we have here, now simply put, I would plot these. So if I plot this, my total production curve would be continuously increasing. My marginal production curve would increase to a point and then start to decline. My average production cost would be below this. It would keep on increasing, decreasing, and then it would remain more or less stable, and at one point it would cross the marginal product. So those would be the curvatures that I would see here. So this law of diminishing marginal productivity or law of variable proportion states that when you have an advantage in the factor of production that is guided, that goes to a point till it is cost effective, and then with each additional unit it starts to decline or diminish. And therefore, whenever we talk about factors of production, the ratio in which the inputs are used, we talk about the increase in the amount of the variable input and the factors of production which become more suitable for the marginal production to increase. So our idea is, in order for a business to survive, you need to have the change that should be there. Now the total, if I break those curves that we have seen here, you have the total product curve which is in the input output plane and it's always positively sloping. However, the marginal production curve or the average production curve looks like an inverted U shape. As long as, listen carefully, as long as the value of marginal product is higher than the average product would keep to rise. So you have, till the point you have marginal productivity greater than the average productivity. At that point, you would have the average product that would keep on rising. At the point where you have the marginal product that starts to fall below the average product, the average product would start to fall. Till that point, the average product was rising. At the point the marginal productivity or the marginal product decreases in compared to the average product, what would happen is you would have the average product that would start to decline, and that's very important to understand in practical. So let's say you go on to a market to buy the clothes. You want just one piece of cloth, but you see an offer, buy 2 get 1 free. So what happens instantly? You tempt to buy one more. So what is a response is you are buying 2 in order to get a third free. Indeed, you require 1. But if it continues, you would buy one more for someone, and what would happen is you would land up with 6 pieces. So what ultimately happens is there is a sharp decline in the marginal productivity that is seen in long run. So every day in and day out, in some form or the other, in our mental calculation, this concept goes on. However, bringing those to paper, applying those is indeed a tedious job and not a practical job for a layman or a common man. But under economics, we try to jot down those human behaviors or those factors of production into a much more streamlined fashion, and therefore we talk about the laws of marginal productivity, the laws of variable proportion, where we focus on the total product, the marginal product, and the changing behavior with the marginal product and the average product and a relation between the same. Now coming on to the returns to scale. When I say returns to scale, let's say there is a proportional increase in the input, and with that proportional increase in the input, the proportional increase in the output remains the same. Then I say it's a constant return to scale. However, my proportional increase in the input, let's say, is lesser than the proportional increase in the output, which is much higher. Then I say there are increasing returns to scale. And finally, if my increase in the input is higher as compared to the increase in the output, I would say there are decreasing returns to scale. Now to understand this, you have an interesting Cobb-Douglas production function that has been given. Now Cobb-Douglas said that the quantity of production function could be defined as the quantity 1 with the increase and the quantity 2 with the increase. Now this proportion of alpha and beta has to remain constant in order to have a constant return to scale. So let's say my return to scale I assume to be 100. The output that I finally want, the constant return is 100. Now if I say this alpha increases by 75%, in order to meet this alpha, beta would be declining and that would be 25%. So what I need to do is I need to create a balance. So I can say if this is alpha, this would be 1 minus alpha, that could be explained. And since then, we can create a balance between the two units or the two factors of production that are there. Also, if there is a scenario when alpha plus beta is less than 1, then I say there is a decreasing production or a decreasing return to scale that is demonstrated. Now, what all assumptions lie under returns to scale? There are two factors of production, two inputs that we are talking about, the land, the capital and the labor. We are talking about a homogeneous labor, a perfect competition that exists. There are industrial variations and constant returns to scale that are taken into consideration. So this is a very important concept where we talk about returns to scale, Cobb-Douglas production function, most important section under production. And let's move to the cost. So what actually is cost? When you have input prices which are given, you would choose a combination of inputs which are least expensive, because as a producer, your idea is to maximize the profit. Now when I am trying to maximize the profit, I am looking for something that is least expensive. So the cost function describes the least cost of producing each and every level of output with its own price of factors of production and technology that are given. Now with this we say we have the short run cost and the long run cost. Before that, let's understand the variables under cost. So cost, as I said, you have the fixed cost, you have the variable cost. So let's say I have a piece of land, that's my fixed cost. So with each unit of output that is governed, my fixed cost would remain the same. Then I would have the variable cost that would ought to change with the increase in the number of labor, increase in the consumption of electricity, increase in the other parameters that are required for day-to-day maintenance, we could say. So those all are part of your variable cost. Now what is a total cost? Total cost would be the sum of the total fixed cost plus total variable cost. How do I calculate average fixed cost? So average fixed cost, simply put, is the total fixed cost divided by the quantity or the output, which is Q here. Okay, so the value of total fixed cost divided by the total average cost would give me the output would give me the average fixed cost. I can also calculate the average variable cost in the same manner. I would have the total variable cost divided by the output units which are there or the quantity that's there, and then I'll get the average variable cost. So average cost would be the sum of average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. Now once I have the average fixed cost and the average variable cost, I calculate the average cost. The next important thing is the short term cost. So short run marginal cost and short run average cost. How do I calculate that? So short run average cost is the average cost that I said here. So I can denote it as average cost or short run average cost. But the thing is, I'll add both these values together to get the short run average cost. And then I have the short run marginal cost. Short run marginal cost is the change in the total cost per unit change in the output. So here it would be 20 to 10, so I have 10, 20 to 30, so I have 10, 30 to 38, so I have 8, 38 to 44, so I have 6, and so on and so forth. So that is my short run marginal cost. So you understood what is the total cost, which is the sum of the total variable cost and the total fixed cost. Then when finding the average cost, again it's the sum of the average variable cost and the average fixed cost, and then you have the short run marginal cost, which is the change per unit total cost with the quantity that is there. So when I plot these short run curves, I have the total fixed cost that remains same. I have an increasing curve for the total variable cost that is registered, and this total cost, since it's a sum of total variable cost and total fixed cost, it would be always higher than the total variable cost, and here I have the total cost. Clear? So I have the total cost now. Now just like the case of marginal product, you also have the marginal cost, which is undefined at a zero level of product or a zero level of output. So in the very first row, we always have the marginal utility or the marginal cost or the marginal product as undefined, because for the first value we do not know what is the change, and therefore it is undefined for the very first value. The average fixed cost we already talked about. The average fixed cost is the ratio of the total fixed cost divided by the quantity. Since the total fixed cost is constant and Q increases, what happens is the average fixed cost would decrease. So the average fixed cost would decline, and then you would have the average variable cost curve that would be there, and this is how you have a U-shaped average variable cost curve for short run. When I plot this along with the average cost curve, which is the sum of the average variable and the average fixed cost, which is declining, I have the short term average cost, which is here, and the short term marginal cost, which is represented here. Now as I see the average variable cost rises, you have the short run marginal cost, which is less than the average cost, and till that point you would have the average variable cost that would decline. At that point, beyond that point, the average variable cost starts to increase. So till the point you have the short run marginal cost, which is less than the average variable cost, you would have the average variable cost that would decline. At that point it would start to increase. So beyond that point it would start to increase, and that's how we have the average short run cost. Now what happens for long run? So short run we already talked about. Now focusing on long run. Long run is a unique combination because in long run you have all the variables that are varied, as we said. So it can be variation in the labor, it can be variation in the capital, there is no fixed cost, and the total cost and the total variable cost always coincide because there is no fixed cost. In long run, I say the things vary. So my total cost and the total variable cost curves would coincide, and I would have a long run average cost curve that would be seen. So this is the long run average cost curve. The long run marginal cost curve is the change in the total cost per unit change in the output that is seen, and that curve runs in this fashion that's there. Now returns to scale in the case of cost would be very similar to what we have already done for the production function. So you have the increasing rate of return to scale, the constant return to scale, and the decreasing returns to scale that would be seen. And for any level of employment that is given in the input, the total of the marginal products for each of the unit would give up the total product, and that's one of the very essential elements of understanding the very fundamentals of the cost. And as we said, the producer always tends to minimize the cost, maximize the profit in order to have the business as a sustaining business. So that was the very fundamental of our microeconomics topics on production and cost. We'll be continuing with many further interesting lessons. Stay subscribed. Have a wonderful day ahead.